Hello everyone and welcome to the Phoenix Crash Course. Today we're going to talk about controllers. Now, if you already watched my request lifecycle video from the same crash course, you already know most of the things that I'm going to talk about today. But I'm going to dive deeper on a couple of topics like rendering formats, so stay tuned. If we go back to our VS Code and open up the router, we all know by now that if you scroll down to the scope of the root, here we can find all of our controllers. And what exactly is a controller? Well, a controller is just an intermediary step between your HTTP request and another function. This other function that lives inside the controller, we call them action. And then inside this action, this is typically where you query the database, you send an email, maybe call another external API, trigger a background job. You do some form of processing, and then you render something. Now, when I say render, I'm not mentioning specifically HTML. By render, I mean anything, any format. So you can render a CSV, you can render text, you can render JSON. So render any format after you finish your data processing. So in theory, if I open up the product controller, I should have two functions called index and show. And that's exactly what we have. Now, if I have a function inside the controller, is that considered an action always? So if I do something like this, def random do 10, this function lives inside the controller. So is it an action? Can I use it on the router file? Not really. You can't. If you want to create an action, this function that lives inside the controller needs to accept two specific parameters. So let's refactor this. The random function, to be converted to an action function, you need to accept a con, which is the shorthand form of connection, followed by params, which is typically where you extract informations about the URL. So if you have an ID on the path params or a query string like the promotional code, you extract that from the params. So then we have a do, and then here typically you render something. So usually we use the render function, but you can render anything you want directly on the controller. So to make this random controller valid, I'm going to return a text for now. So text con followed by the data that I want to return. So this is some text. Okay. We're not using params, so we can add an underscore. And now this is a valid action. So we can go back to the router, create a new GET request to like products / random. We want to use the product controller. And then inside here, we want to call the random action. Okay. What? Oh yeah, I forgot the / here. So we need / products / random. So let me go back to the terminal, mix phx.server. This should start the server. Going back to Chrome, refresh this. And this is not working. Why is it not working? Localhost port 4000. Did I do anything wrong here? Go back to Chrome. Let me open up a new tab. Okay, I have no idea why this is not working. So let's go here. And then we have the root page, which we know is working. If I go to / products / random. Oh yeah, right. Actually, we have an issue here that we can fix. If we go back to this scope, can you detect what is the problem? This is going to bind to any URL that is / products / whatever. So this, unfortunately, we're running this before we detect if there is a random on the path params or not. So to fix this, we can just move this up. Let me go back to Chrome, refresh, and there you go. This is some text. I can even open up the developer tabs. We can go to network, we can refresh this. So we have a random request. As you can see, the type is document. If we click here, open up the headers, as you can see, content type text plain. So our new random action is working. Now, I used text as an example. In theory, you can use whatever format you want. So let me go back to the controller, product controller, random action. Instead of text, I want to render HTML directly. So let's test this out. I'm going to add HTML inline here. So I'm going to say HTML. This is going to take a while. Then we have body, then the closing tag for body. And here I want to render an H1 where I say, whoa, this is working. And then I want to close that H1, save. Is this going to work? Let's check this out. Refresh. Ooh, this is working. If we click here on the request, scroll down, content type, text /HTML, and you can even see the response. We have a beautiful HTML here. The tags, the body tag, the H1 tag works perfectly. And what about JSON? Can I return JSON? Yes, you can. Now, to render JSON, you're going to replace that with the JSON function. And how do I render JSON? Here, you can use a map, okay? Under the hood, if I'm not mistaken, whenever you render JSON, where is the JSON? Yeah, under the hood, it's using this library called JSON. So you can use any format that works with this library, it's going to work. Typically, we just return a map, any type of map. So we can create a map where we have a message followed by, this is JSON. Okay, this should work. If I go back to Google Chrome, there you go. If I reload, I can even pretty print the message. We have a message, this is JSON. If I go back to the request and headers, where is it? Yeah, content type application /JSON. Really nice. Okay, but should we use like JSON, text, and HTML, those functions right inside the controller? I mean, if you have a small controller, maybe, like, I don't know, you want to return something super quick and you don't want to create 10 other folders and files, then yeah, sure, you can use the JSON function here directly. But ideally, we use the render function. And how does the render function works under the hood? So I'm going to replace this random action with a render function, all right? Now, we already know by now that the render function accepts 3 parameters. The first one, of course, is the con. The second one is the template that we want to render. So let's say that I have a template called random, okay? And the third parameter is the assigns. The assigns is a keyword list with all the variables that you want available inside your random view file. Now, I don't want to pass any props or assigns, so for now, I'm going to leave that. And this works out of the box. Okay, now the render function is a bit magical. We need to follow a couple of rules for this render function to work. And we already know some of them. So if we go back to the folders, first of all, we need to create another file on the same root folder as our controller. So if we have our controller, the product controller, inside the controllers folder, we need to go to the same controllers folder, create a new file, where the name of the file is product, followed by the format that you want to use. So on our case, I want to use HTML. So product html.ex, and actually we already have this file because we created on a previous video. So for now, I'm going to skip that. Actually, I think I'm going to do some refactoring. I'm going to create a new random controller. I think it makes sense. So I'm going to go back to the router. I want actually /random, and then I want the random controller. Inside the random controller, I want to run the random function, the random action. So I can remove this. Okay, I'm going to create a new controller, new file, random controller.ex, def module, shop web, random controller. On top, we need to use shop web controller. And here you can add your actions. Our action is called random. Okay, we can close the product controller for now. Now this should work. Let me go back to Google Chrome. Now I want to go to /random only. No random. Oh yeah, sure. This is not working because we are trying to render something, but we don't have the equivalent view file. So of course, this is not going to work. Now to fix this, as I was mentioning before, on the same folder that the random controller lives, you need to create another file, which is the root name of your controller, which is random on our case, underscore, and the format that you want to use. So on our case, we want to use HTML. So it's random underscore HTML.ex. Here, the name of the module that we need to use is, def module is the root, which is random, followed by the format, all in uppercase. So HTML, and then we need to call another macro here, which is use shop web. Here it's HTML. Okay. And now, as I mentioned before, you can use that magical embed templates function. But now I think I already mentioned that. So I'm going to render the HTML here in line. So I'm going to say render. Not render. Def random. Now this random function, it accepts the assigns, which is the variables that we want to pass to our front end, but we don't have anything here. So I can just add an underscore, assigns, do, and then to render HTML, we want to use something called Heeks, which is like the JSX equivalent for Phoenix. And don't worry, probably the next video we're going to talk about it. So you want to use this very weird H sigil. There we go. And then here you can return anything. So I can say H1, this is the random page. Okay. And what is going on? Oh yeah, we need the assigns, but we're not using the assigns. Okay. Apparently I cannot add an underscore here because we need the assigns variable for this to be valid HTML. So this should work if I go back to Chrome, random, yep. This is the random page. It works. Beautiful. So this is how the render function works. You need on the same folder as the random controller, you need the same root name, which is random, underscore the format that you want to render, and then you create a separate module. On this module, you need the same root name, which is random, followed by the format, all uppercase, and that's it. Now, let's say that we want to use a mixture of HTML and JSON. Is it possible? Yes, of course. Now, the recommendation is if you want to render a different format, you create a separate scope, okay, and then you use a separate controller. So here we can have get / products. We want to use the product API controller followed by index. Okay. This already works out of the box. You don't need to change anything. You just create your new controller and then you return a JSON. This works. But we're going to talk more about this on the JSON course. For now, I am specifically talking about if you want to use the same controller to render two different formats. Can I use, for example, this products controller, the same one, to render HTML and JSON at the same time? Yes, you can. You first need to change one line of code here, which is, well, our browser pipeline only accepts HTML. We now need to accept HTML and JSON. Now this is going to work. And then inside your product controller, here's what you're going to do. We have our index function, which renders something. And then that render is going to call the product HTML. Where is it? There we go. Now we already know that this returns HTML, but I want to return JSON now. How can I do that? Well, we can follow the same principles for this file, but for JSON. So we need to create another file on the same folder as the product controller. Now I'm going to call this product _ JSON.ex. And then we're going to run def module. And then it's shopweb.product.json, and then JSON all uppercase. Here we don't have to call any macro. You can not use the use keyword. You can just add your function directly. So in the product HTML, we have one function called index. We want to use the same index name here. So def index. Since this is a view file, we need to accept an assigns variable. Assigns do. And as I just mentioned, if you want to return JSON, you can simply return a map. So you can return a map of like data, and then here we're going to pass a list of products. So a list of other maps where we have a bunch of video games. We have name, God of War. We might have Skyrim, and then we also have Diablo 4. There we go. And I think I can remove the assigns here because I am not using the H sigil. So if we're using JSON, you don't need to use the assign. You can just add an underscore before. Okay, so now I have the same product controller, the same one. And then I'm calling the render function. Is the render function going to render HTML or JSON? Because we have both. If I go back to Google Chrome, I go to / products. This is rendering HTML. Okay, how do I call the JSON view? On Phoenix, we have like a hidden query parameter that you can pass, which is you're going to add a question mark to the URL and then underscore format equals JSON. There you go. We can click on pretty print. Now we have data, which is a list of games. We have God of War, Skyrim, Diablo 4. So how is this useful, to be honest? Well, maybe you have a web application that uses the / products, and then you need an HTML, right? And then maybe you also have a mobile app. And then the mobile app, you want to reuse the same route. So here you can just call / products on your mobile app, followed by this specific query string. This way you can specify which format you want to render. Now, this is just an example. It's good to know, but as I said before, ideally you have a separate scope with a separate controller, a separate action, and you try to separate those things out. Especially because maybe like you need some data that is different for the HTML and then different for the mobile app. and you don't want to mix these two things together. Like in terms of code organization, I think it's better to separate things, but it's good to know that you can have multiple rendering formats like product JSON, product HTML. They can live together, and then you can just specify this format, a query string, and it's going to work. I think it's pretty cool. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. See you next time.